you'd like to call, here's the number. 416-640-0200. That's 416-640-0200. The Marc Patrone radio program, heard exclusively on News Talk, Saga 960.
And we're back with more News Talk. So glad you could join us on this Tuesday edition of the show. We've got Miles Kirsten on the line from near Madison, Wisconsin. And this is interesting. He sent me a text earlier today. He says the mayor of Madison was literally dancing in the streets with the protesters and did not even enforce her own curfew. We're talking about Madison here, where this took place?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it seems like I'm living in a South Park episode, you know?
I mean, paint a picture for me. What, like literally dancing amidst the rubble and the turmoil of these riots?
They had a roadblock. This would be yesterday, Monday, right? So Saturday night, big riot. Sunday, there was still some looting and vandalism and rioting that happened later in the night. And then Sunday, there was supposed to be this curfew, but they didn't really enforce it. And then yesterday, Monday, they did a roadblock on the Isthmus downtown. And the mayor showed up, and the protesters were playing music on a loudspeaker, and she was actually there, like, dancing around with them and everything, and then kind of giving these, like, loose answers about how we're going to enforce the curfew, and that it's a tough decision, and then being really wafty about what actually she was going to do and not do because she wants their vote, and she's, like, towing the line with the protesters. And then 9 o'clock came around, the police weren't anywhere in sight for 3 hours, and then at 1 o'clock it was like, oh, the crowd's dispersing. Nope, they're looting. They smashed the windows to a small, tiny, like, there's this little old woman has a bookstore. They smashed her windows out. They spray painted the War Museum. They vandalized more local businesses and smashed more things and looted more things. And you know, it's like you don't have to necessarily come down with tear gas and pepper spray, but you know, the sound cannons will disperse crowds pretty quickly, or just coming in force and grabbing people and zip tying them and giving them a ticket is going to stop them from at least doing it the next day. And there are more and more people coming into this town and I think helping to start these protests into riots.
So as you're talking about Antifa and these types of organized campaigns, I mean, we've heard about the strategically placed bricks and bottles that magically find their way to some of these sites. So you have to figure that some people are behind this, an organized attempt to cause this damage.
As crazy as it sounds, there are, and I mean, I'm not going to say it's reflective of the Republican Party necessarily, but there are those. You know, there are violent people in every political party, and there were two young women who were arrested for breaking windows Saturday night, and it turns out, it's these two blonde girls from Waunakee that supposedly are Trump supporters. So, I mean, there are right-wing agitators, too. I mean, people are setting the bait, and then people are falling for it. I mean, this is insane, and the mayor and the police, and I want to say the governor too, because the state capitol was vandalized again last night, and the governor oversees the Department of Administration, which oversees the Capitol Police. It looks like the Capitol Police stood down too.
Oh, what about the military? That Trump's going to unleash thousands of soldiers. Is that going to happen? And are you going to be seeing some of that in your area?
Well, not in my area directly, but I mean, it's just like I absolutely agree that the man in Minneapolis was murdered, and I agree that there are people murdered all the time by the police unnecessarily who are unarmed, and that you know, when a police officer commits murder on an unarmed citizen, like, they should be absolutely held accountable and just like everybody else. But what this is doing, all of these protests are resulting in these riots, and then the riots are causing the absolute opposite of what people wanted. You're actually getting more of a police presence and more police violence because of these riots. I mean, all of this stuff is so counterproductive in the end.
They should sick Rudy Giuliani on that, because, I mean, he did a great job in New York City, well, at least from what I understand, Miles. And I mean, well,
I would have a different opinion than Rudy Giuliani, but you know, that's a whole nother subject matter.
I mean, he's saying that these people are they're being allowed to do more than they should be. So they start protesting. People think, well, we'll give them a little bit of rope and then they'll stop. And then they take that rope and then they demand more. So it's like they get worse. They're getting more brazen and operating with more impunity rather than restricting themselves, if you know what I'm saying.
And to think about the corona situation, I mean, how can we tell churches not to have congregations of 50 and then we're going to allow thousands in the street? I mean, some of these protesters are wearing masks, but they're in close proximity, and you look, especially in Madison, you see that dozens and dozens of them are using the exact same megaphone, and they're all in close proximity, and they're dancing together, and they're interlocking arms together. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see COVID spike in Wisconsin and other places very, very hard. And like I said yesterday, I am just as critical of the reopen protesters who are not safe about this virus. And I think these protests are actually being even more unsafe about the possibility of spreading the virus.
Well, it's just desserts. I hate to say it, but I mean, if you're going to be involved in this stuff, then presumably you're going to be spreading it. I mean, whatever happened to COVID-19 anyway? It's just completely blown off the front pages, so people aren't worried. It's like, well, what do we need COVID for when we've got riots to try and destabilize the Trump administration and force him out of office? I mean, it's just been a series of things, Miles. I mean, look at it. Whether it's Stormy Daniels or the Ukraine or Russia collusion, COVID-19, the economic downturn as a result of COVID-19, and now race riots, it just seems that they are throwing everything at this president in order to try and destroy his administration.
I think there's valid points in that. I mean, the COVID is real, and we're seeing it go higher and higher in Wisconsin. And, you know, the thing is, like, yes, police have murdered unarmed, innocent people. But at the same time, we also should realize that COVID has killed more Americans in the last few months than police have in the last 100 years. And so, I mean, you can go out and protest the police, but then if you get sick and you get your whole family sick and then somebody dies as a result of it, I mean, and how many people have died as a result of these protests? I mean, these protests are turning violent, and I agree with the sentiment of that there needs to be serious criminal justice reform, and there needs to be, you know, people need to be prosecuted whether they're a cop or not if they commit murder. But this situation is, you know, there are groups organizing these protests, like for instance in Madison there are 3 groups organizing these protests, and these are the same groups that have been disrupting the school board meetings for 2 years and allowed to yell and scream at the school board. And now it's like, oh, those people are organizing the protest, and those kids from those high schools are the ones doing a lot of this rioting and looting.
Yeah, they're anarchists. They're people who want to overthrow the country. They don't like the Constitution anymore, and they want to.
I mean, they're using kids for a political agenda, and sadly, some of these kids are becoming useful idiots for an agenda they don't even understand.
Miles, thank you. I appreciate you coming on the show with this update.
Thank you for having me.
It's Miles Kristen of Wisconsin International Radio coming to us from nearby Madison.